HOA Karen held a wedding on my land, so I released the cows, and she got trampled in her gown. The sun hung low over the rolling hills of my 40-acre farm, painting the fields gold and casting long shadows from the old oak trees. I leaned against the weathered fence, chewing on a blade of grass, watching the world settle into evening. This land was my sanctuary, my inheritance from generations of hard-working folks who'd tilled it, loved it, and fought for it. It was quiet, save for the distant lowing of my cows and the rustle of wind through the wildflowers. Quiet, that is, until Karen Voss decided my land was her personal wedding venue. Karen was the president of Meadowview Estates, the ritzy HOA that had sprung up a mile down the road. She was the kind of woman who'd knock on your door at 7 a.m. to complain about your mailbox being a shade too blue. She had a smile like a used car salesman and the tenacity of a wasp. For months, she'd been eyeing my property during HOA inspections, passing through on the county line, muttering about how my unkempt land lowered her neighborhood's property values. I'd laughed it off, told her to mind her own business. My land wasn't part of her HOA, and I liked it that way. But Karen didn't want to let a little thing like property lines stop her. It started with a letter, slid under my door like a snake. Crisp, embossed with the HOA logo. It informed me that my land had been selected to host the wedding of Karen's daughter, Brittany. No request, no discussion, just a date, a time, and a list of demands. They'd need access to my fields for the ceremony, my barn for the reception, and my driveway for parking. Oh, and I was to clear out my livestock for the day. Compensation? A generous mention in the wedding program. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the fireplace, figuring that was the end of it. 2 days later, I woke to the sound of trucks rumbling down my driveway. I stumbled outside in my boots and flannel, blinking against the morning sun, to find Karen directing a swarm of caterers, florists, and decorators like a general on a battlefield. Tents were going up in my west pasture. Fairy lights were being strung through my trees, and a team of landscapers was hacking at my wildflower patch to make way for a ceremony aisle. Brittany, a carbon copy of her mother in a designer tracksuit, was posing for photos near my pond, squealing about how rustic it all was. "Karen," I said, striding over, my voice tight. "What the hell is this?" She turned, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, Tom, I knew you'd come around. We're just setting up for Brittany's big day. It's going to be fabulous." "This is my land," I said, slow and deliberate. "You didn't ask. You don't have permission. Get out." Her smile didn't falter. "Now, Tom, don't be difficult. This wedding will put your little farm on the map. Think of the exposure. Besides, the HOA board voted unanimously to approve this event. It's practically a community service." "The HOA doesn't own my land," I snapped. "Pack up, or I'm calling the sheriff." Karen laughed, patting my arm like I was a petulant child. "You're so cute when you're grumpy, Tom. We're not going anywhere. The invitations have already gone out. 500 guests, including the mayor. You wouldn't want to cause a scene, would you?" I stared at her, my blood simmering. I'd dealt with pushy folks before, buyers trying to lowball me, bankers sniffing around after Dad passed, but Karen was a new level of audacity. I turned and walked away, not trusting myself to speak. She called after me, her voice syrupy. "See you at the rehearsal dinner, Tom." That night, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the window where Karen's tents glowed like a carnival. I'd called the sheriff, but he was an old buddy of Karen's husband and mumbled something about permits and public interest before hanging up. I was on my own. I thought about my granddad, who'd fought off developers with a shotgun and a grin, and my mom, who'd planted every wildflower in that field by hand. This land wasn't just dirt, it was family. And Karen was trampling it like it was her backyard. That's when the idea hit me. My cows, 32 head of Angus, gentle as lambs but curious as cats. They were pinned up in the east pasture, far from Karen's circus, but the gate between pastures was old and rickety. If it just happened to swing open well, cows wander. Nature takes its course. I grinned, feeling a spark of mischief I hadn't felt since I was a kid stealing apples from Old Man Carter's orchard. The next morning, wedding day, I woke before dawn. Karen's crew was already buzzing, setting up chairs and a string quartet. Brittany was in a white gown that looked like it cost more than my tractor, barking orders at a photographer. "Karen," in a sequin dress that screamed mother of the bride, was micromanaging every detail. I slipped out to the east pasture, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and glee. The cows looked up, chewing cud, their big eyes curious. I patted Bessie, my favorite, and whispered, "Time for a stroll, girls." I unlatched the gate and gave it a nudge. The cows didn't need much convincing. They ambled through, noses to the ground, heading straight for the west pasture where Karen's wedding was in full swing. I leaned against a tree, arms crossed, and waited for the chaos to unfold. It didn't take long. The first scream came from a bridesmaid, who'd spotted Bessie munching on a floral arrangement. Then another, as the herd wandered into the ceremony aisle, leaving muddy hoofprints on the white runner. Guests gasped, phones came out, and Karen's voice cut through the air like a siren. "Tom, what is this? Get these filthy animals out of here." I sauntered over, feigning surprise. "Well, shoot. Karen, looks like the gate broke. Cows'll do what cows do. I'll round him up eventually." Her face turned a shade of red I'd only seen in overripe tomatoes. "This is sabotage. You'll hear from my lawyer." "Lawyer, huh?" I said, scratching my chin. "Better call him quick, 'cause here comes Brutus." Brutus was my bull, a 2,000-pound beast who'd slipped through the gate with the herd. He wasn't mean, but he was clumsy, and when he lumbered toward the dessert table, the crowd scattered like roaches. Tables overturned, champagne flutes shattered, and Brittany's gown caught on a chair, tearing with a sound like ripping silk. Karen lunged to save her daughter, but her heels sank into the mud, and she went down hard, her sequins glinting in the dirt. For a moment, it was glorious. The string quartet played on, oblivious, as cows munched roses and guests fled. I almost felt bad almost. Then I saw him, a man in a worn denim jacket, standing at the edge of the chaos, watching with a quiet smile. He was older, maybe 60, with a face like leather and eyes that held a story. I didn't know him, but he looked like he belonged here, like he knew this land better than I did. He caught my eye and tipped his hat, then vanished into the crowd. The sheriff showed up eventually, and I spent an hour explaining the accident, while my hired hand, Jake, rounded up the cows. Karen was livid, threatening lawsuits, but the damage was done. The wedding was a wreck. Brittany was in tears, and Karen's gown was ruined. I went to bed that night with a grin, thinking I'd won. But the next morning, I found a note tacked to my barn door. No signature, just a scrawled message. "You don't know what you started, Tom. This land ain't yours no more." My grin faded. I thought of the man in the denim jacket, his quiet smile, and a chill ran through me. Karen's wedding was just the beginning. This land, my home, was hiding secrets I'd never imagined. I spent the day fixing the gate, my mind racing. Who was that man? What did he mean? I called Jake, who'd lived in town his whole life, and asked if he knew anyone matching the description. Jake went quiet, then said, "Sounds like old man Hargrove." "But that's impossible, Tom. He's been dead 10 years. Hargrove. The name hit me like a brick. My granddad had bought this land from a Hargrove, a recluse who'd vanished after the sale. Rumors swirled cursed land, buried treasure, bad blood. I'd laughed them off as kids' tales. Now, I wasn't so sure. That night, I couldn't sleep. The farm felt different, like it was watching me. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and headed to the barn. The note was still there, fluttering in the breeze. I tore it down, my hands shaking, and noticed something carved into the wood beneath. A crude flower, like the wild ones in my field. My mom's flowers. My heart stopped. This wasn't about Karen anymore. This was personal. I turned, hearing a rustle in the dark. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer, just the wind. But I swore I saw him again, Hargrove, or his ghost standing at the edge of the field, his eyes glinting like a predator's. I ran back to the house, locked the door, and sat up till dawn, my shotgun across my lap. The next week was a blur. Karen's lawyer sent a summons, claiming I was trespassing for damages, but I barely read it. Strange things were happening on my land. Tools went missing, replaced by old, rusted ones I'd never seen. The cows acted spooked, refusing to graze in the west pasture. And every night, I found new carvings, flowers. Always flowers on fence posts, on trees, on my porch. I dug through old boxes in the attic, searching for anything about Hargrove. I found a photo, yellowed and brittle, my granddad shaking hands with a man in a denim jacket. Hargrove. And behind them, In my field, a patch of wildflowers I'd never noticed before, shaped like a grave. I was losing my grip on reality. Jake tried to talk sense into me, said it was stress, but I saw the fear in his eyes too. He'd found a rusted locket in the barn, engraved with E.M. Not his initials, not mine. We buried it, but the next day, it was back, sitting on my kitchen table. I started drinking again, something I'd swore off after Dad's funeral. The town whispered about me, about the cursed farm, about Karen's wedding being a sign of worse to come. Then Karen showed up again, unannounced, her Mercedes kicking up dust in my driveway. I braced myself for another fight, but she looked broken. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was a mess, and her hands trembled as she clutched a folder. "Tom," she said, her voice raw, "we need to talk." I let her in, wary. She sat at my table, staring at the locket like it was poison. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." "Know what?" I demanded, my patience thin. She slid the folder open across the table, revealing yellowed deeds, newspaper clippings, and a grainy photo of a woman. "This land," she said, "it was never yours. It was stolen. From her." I stared at the photo, a woman with my mom's eyes, standing in my field, holding a wildflower. The clipping beside it read, "Local woman found dead in land dispute, 1935. No suspects found. Her name was Eliza Hargrove." "Yem." Karen's voice shook as she continued. "My dad was the mayor back then. He helped cover it up. The Hargroves owned this land, but my grandpa wanted it. They said Eliza fell, an accident, but it wasn't. They buried her here, unmarked, and took everything. When I planned the wedding, I thought it was just a cute venue. But then I found this in my dad's old safe. And now she's angry." I felt the room tilt. The locket, the flowers, Hargrove's ghost. It wasn't about me or Karen, it was about Eliza. My granddad must have known, bought the land cheap, and never asked questions. My mom's wildflowers, they weren't hers. They were Eliza's, marking her grave. "Tom," Karen said, tears streaming, "I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. But I saw her. Last night, in my dreams. She said the land wants blood." I wanted to laugh, to tell her she was crazy. But I'd seen him too, Hargrove, watching me. And I'd felt her, in the weight of the flowers, in the cow's fear, in the carvings on my barn. This land wasn't mine. It was never mine. It was hers. That night, I stood in the west pasture, the wildflowers glowing under the stars. I didn't know what to do, apologize, dig, run. But I knew one thing. Karen's wedding had woken something, and it wouldn't sleep again. I heard a low moan, like the earth itself, and saw her, Hargrove, not Hargrove, but Eliza, standing at the edge of the field, her dress white as bone, her eyes hollow. She pointed at me, then at the ground, and I knew what she wanted. Blood. I stood frozen in the west pasture, Eliza's ghostly figure pointing at the earth, her hollow eyes boring into me. The wildflowers swayed, though the air was still, and the low moan I'd heard seemed to pulse from the ground itself. My farm, my home, felt like a stranger now, its secrets unraveling like a pulled thread. Karen's words echoed in my head. The land wants blood. I didn't know if she was right, but I knew I couldn't ignore this. Not anymore. The next morning, I called Jake over. He arrived with his usual easy grin, but it faded when he saw my face. I showed him the locket, the photo of Eliza, and the carvings on the barn. "Jake," I said, "this ain't just about Karen's wedding. Something's wrong with this land. You ever hear anything about the Hargroves? Anything at all?" He shifted, uneasy, his boots scuffing the dirt. "Tom, you're spooked. It's just old stories. Let it go." But I couldn't. I pressed him, and after a long pause, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "All right. My ma used to talk about the Hargroves. Said they were cheated out of this land. Eliza, she was kin, Tom. My great-aunt or something. I never told you 'cause it didn't seem to matter. The family moved on, scattered. But ma always said this place was cursed. Said Eliza never left." I stared at him, my stomach twisting. "Jake, my hired hand, my friend, was tied to this. Why didn't you say anything?" I snapped. "All these years, and you let me live on a damn grave." "I didn't know it was true," he shot back. "It was just talk, Tom. Ghost stories. You think I'd stay here if I thought it was real? But it was real. The locket, the carvings, the man in the denim jacket, Hargrove, or his ghost, or something worse. And now Jake." part of the Hargrove bloodline, standing in my kitchen like he hadn't just turned my world upside down. I wanted to be angry, but I saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear I felt. We were both in this now, whether we liked it or not. Karen came back that afternoon, looking worse than before. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hands clutching a thermos of coffee like it was a lifeline. I saw her again. She whispered, sitting at my table. Eliza. She was in my house, Tom. Standing over my bed. I can't sleep. Brittany's a wreck. She won't leave her room. I didn't want to feel sorry for Karen, not after her stunt with the wedding, but I did. She wasn't the polished HOA tyrant anymore. She was scared, human, broken. What do we do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. We give her what she wants, Karen said. We make it right. But how do you make right a murder? A theft? A life buried in an unmarked grave? I thought of my granddad, shaking hands with Hargrove, buying this land with blood on it. I thought of my mom, planting those wildflowers, maybe knowing more than she ever let on. The guilt was a weight, crushing me. Jake had an idea. My ma used to say the Hargroves believed in rituals. Old ways. Maybe we can honor her. Give her a proper burial. Say her name. It sounded crazy, but what else did we have? That night, the three of us, me, Jake, and Karen stood in the west pasture with a shovel and a prayer. The wildflowers glowed under the moonlight, their petals trembling. I dug where Eliza had pointed, the earth soft and yielding, like it wanted to be opened. Karen held a flashlight, her hands shaking, while Jake muttered something Gavathi. System, something under his breath, half in prayer, half in fear. We dug for hours, the silence heavy between us. The ground was softer than it should have been, like it had been waiting. At 3 feet, my shovel hit something hard. A wooden box, rotted and splintered. I pried it open, my heart pounding. Inside were bones, brittle and gray, wrapped in the remnants of a white dress. Eliza, Karen gasped, dropping the flashlight. Jake crossed himself, whispering, Lord, have mercy. We laid her bones on a blanket, careful as we could. Karen sobbed quietly, and I couldn't tell if it was fear or grief. Jake found a locket in the box, identical to the one we'd found in the barn, and his hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a tiny photo of a young Eliza, smiling, and a lock of dark hair. She was only 22, he whispered, his voice breaking. We buried her properly the next day, in the town cemetery, with a small headstone that read, Eliza Hargrove, 1913 to 1935, rest in peace. The preacher said a few words, and a handful of townsfolk came, drawn by the whispers of the cursed farm. Karen paid for it all, her face pale, but resolute. I didn't know what to feel: anger, shame, sorrow. This was my land, my home, but it had been hers first, and we'd all paid for it. But the peace didn't last. The carvings kept appearing, flowers, etched into my barn, my porch, my truck. The cows still wouldn't graze in the west pasture. And every night, I saw her, Eliza, standing at the edge of the field, her white dress glowing, her eyes demanding more. Jake started drinking, his easy grin gone. Karen stopped coming by, but I heard she'd sold her house and moved to the city, Brittany in tow. The town avoided me, their whispers louder now. Tom's cursed. That land's cursed. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood in the west pasture, shotgun in hand, and shouted into the dark. What do you want, Eliza? We buried you. We said your name. What more is there? The wind answered, carrying that low moan, and I saw her again, closer this time. Her face clear, beautiful, furious, sad. She pointed at the ground, then at me, and I knew. A burial wasn't enough. The land wanted blood mine. I thought of running, selling the farm, leaving it all behind. But this was my home, my family's legacy, tainted as it was. I couldn't abandon it. So I made a choice. I went to the barn, grabbed a rope, and climbed the tallest oak in the west pasture. The wildflowers watched, silent witnesses. I tied the knot, my hands steady, and thought of my mom, my granddad, Eliza. I'm sorry, I whispered to all of them. But as I stepped off the branch, something grabbed Maya's hand, cold as death. I fell to the ground, gasping, and saw her, Eliza, her face inches from mine. Not you, she whispered, her voice like the wind. Her. I stumbled back to the house, heart racing. Karen. Eliza wanted Karen. I called her, my voice hoarse, and told her to come. She arrived at dawn, her eyes hollow, knowing what was coming. We stood in the pasture, the wild deleg system, flowers swaying around us. She wants me, Karen said, her voice barely a whisper. I knew it. My family took everything from her. It's only fair. I shook my head, desperate. No, Karen. We can fight this. We can find another way. But her eyes were resolute, and for the first time, I saw not the HOA tyrant but a woman carrying the weight of her ancestors' sins. I started this, she said. The wedding, the arrogance. I woke her up. It's my debt. Before I could stop her, she pulled a small knife from her purse, the kind you'd use to cut fruit, and walked to the center of the wildflower patch. Tell Brittany I love her, she said, then plunged the knife into her chest. I screamed, lunging for her, but it was too late. She collapsed, blood seeping into the earth, the wildflowers drinking it in. The air grew still, the moan gone. Eliza's figure appeared one last time, her face soft, almost peaceful. She looked at Karen's body, then at me, and nodded before fading into the dawn. I buried Karen next to Eliza, per her whispered request. The town called it a tragedy, a suicide, but I knew better. Jake left soon after, unable to look at me. Brittany never spoke to me again. The farm was quiet now, the carvings gone, the cows grazing freely. But every night, I walked the west pasture, waiting for Eliza, wondering if she'd come back. She never did. The land was mine again, but at what cost? My family's legacy, Karen's life, Eliza's justicide all felt like a Pyrrhic victory. I sold the farm a year later, unable to bear the weight of those wildflowers. I moved to a small apartment in the city, but the smell of them followed me, a reminder of blood and debt. This story leaves us with questions of right and wrong. Was I justified in releasing the cows, a petty act of revenge that unleashed a deeper curse? Was Karen's sacrifice fair, or was she a victim of a past she didn't create? Should Eliza's vengeance have been sated by a burial, or was blood the only currency the land would accept? Share your thoughts. What would you have done in my place, in Karen's, in Eliza's? Where does justice end and vengeance begin?